Jack had always believed in the magic of unexpected encounters, and it was on a breezy spring morning, beneath a sky the color of faded denim, that he first laid eyes on Emma, her auburn hair caught in the wind like flames dancing across the skyline. Her smile tentative yet warm as she stood near the bookstore where he worked, flipping absent-mindedly through a poetry anthology. Something about her presence made the world quieter, softer, and in that moment, Jack knew his life had tilted on its axis. They spoke over coffee soon after, and that brief conversation, filled with awkward laughter and the vulnerable sharing of secrets, turned into days spent wandering city streets, months wrapped in late-night phone calls and sun-drenched afternoons on rooftops, until love seeped into every crevice of their lives like light through a cracked door. And Jack began to think maybe, just maybe, Emma was the one who would quiet the ghosts of his past, particularly the ghost named Sophia, the woman who had once broken his heart so thoroughly he feared he would never feel whole again. But Emma, with her gentle soul and fierce loyalty, never judged him for the lingering sadness he couldn't quite name, instead choosing to love him not in spite of his broken parts, but because of them. And so, after 3 years of love that felt as effortless as breathing, he got down on one knee beneath the cherry blossoms that lined their favorite park and asked Emma to marry him. Her yes came through tears and laughter, the kind that makes your chest ache with joy, and they threw themselves into wedding planning, their days a blur of cake tastings, flower arrangements, and whispered promises beneath fairy lights, until finally the day arrived, painted in soft hues of peach and gold, and Emma, radiant in lace, stood waiting at the altar with trembling hands and eyes filled with the kind of hope that only love can birth. But as Jack stood in the small back room of the chapel, tying his tie with shaking fingers, a knock on the door interrupted the rhythm of his heartbeat. And when he turned, there stood Sophia, like a storm he thought had long since passed, her dark eyes glossy with unshed tears, her voice a whisper of regret and longing as she said, "I had to see you before you made the biggest mistake of your life." The air left the room in a rush, and Jack was thrown back into memories he buried. Nights spent tangled in her sheets, arguments that left them breathless, the way she used to look at him like he was her anchor, and her undoing all at once. And in that moment, a lifetime of clarity vanished under the weight of an old flame rekindled. He didn't know what possessed him. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the part of him that never truly let her go. But Jack turned away from the altar, from Emma, from the life they had built, and walked out the chapel doors hand in hand with the woman who had once shattered him. Emma stood at the altar, bouquet trembling in her hands, as whispers spread like wildfire through the pews, her father stepping forward with confusion etched across his face, and the realization hit her not like a punch, but a slow unraveling. The kind of pain that doesn't scream, but weeps quietly into the corners of your soul. And she collapsed into her mother's arms as tears smudged the perfect makeup she had spent hours applying, the flowers falling from her grasp like a symbol of all that had been lost in an instant. And though her heart splintered into 1,000 pieces, she didn't chase after him. She wouldn't beg someone to stay who didn't choose her. Weeks passed like a blur, and while Jack moved in with Sophia, trying to recreate the passion they once had, the cracks in their foundation showed quickly, arguments resurfacing like ghosts that refused to stay buried. And the love they thought they were chasing turned out to be nothing but an echo of the past that couldn't survive the light of reality. What Jack hadn't realized, what he refused to confront, was that chasing what once was could never replace what could have been. And while Sophia kissed him like she was trying to erase the years between them, he couldn't help but feel the emptiness of a life that was no longer his. The ghost of Emma's laughter haunting the silence between his thoughts, the memory of her soft humming in the kitchen, the way she would reach for his hand in crowded places without thinking. And meanwhile, Emma retreated from the world, her phone left unanswered. the wedding dress still hanging by the window like a cruel joke. Her nights consumed by the echo of vows never spoken and a future torn away without warning. And though friends came by with sympathy and casseroles, none of it filled the gaping wound in her chest. Because how do you heal from a betrayal so deep? It feels like your heart has been rewritten in someone else's language. She walked the streets aimlessly sometimes, passing the bakery where they once shared croissants on rainy mornings, the bookstore where he bought her a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, whispering, "Because you're my wild storm." And every place held a memory that refused to fade, until one night, when the pain grew too heavy to carry, she stood on the bridge overlooking the river, rain soaking her dress, and she whispered into the darkness, "Why wasn't I enough?" But no answer came, only the soft ripple of water, and the hush of the city mourning with her. And in the weeks that followed, Emma decided not to let this be the end of her story. She cut her hair, started painting again, poured her grief into every stroke of color, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to breathe again. While Jack found himself staring out the window of the apartment he now shared with Sophia, her voice in the next room sharp and bitter, as they argued over everything and nothing. And he began to wonder if he had made a mistake that couldn't be undone. He tried to justify it at first, telling himself he had followed his heart, that maybe fate was giving him a second chance to get it right with Sophia. But every time he passed the corner where he and Emma first kissed, or smelled vanilla and remembered her perfume, he felt a hollow ache that no amount of nostalgia could fill. And it didn't help that Sophia had changed too, grown more cynical, less patient, her love now laced with insecurity and guilt, as though she knew deep down he wasn't truly hers anymore. Not completely, not in the way that mattered, because a part of him still belonged to Emma, always would. And one night, when the silence between them grew too loud to ignore, Sophia looked at him with tired eyes and said, "You're still in love with her, aren't you?" And Jack didn't answer because the truth was a weight he could no longer carry. And she walked out of the room without another word, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the echo of a love that had already begun to crumble. Emma, meanwhile, was building something new from the ashes, her art catching the attention of a local gallery, her days filled with color and new beginnings. Though the pain still lingered like a shadow in the corners of her smile. And when she saw Jack's name light up on her phone one evening, a number she had deleted but could never quite forget, her hands trembled, and she let it ring until the silence returned. Not because she didn't still love him in some quiet, broken part of her heart, but because she had finally realized she deserved more than someone who had made her an afterthought. Jack sat alone on the edge of the bed that still smelled faintly of Sophia's perfume, his phone cold in his hand as the call to Emma went unanswered. And for the first time in months, the magnitude of what he had done hit him with full force. Not just the act of leaving her at the altar, but the betrayal of everything they had built together. The late nights whispering about dreams under the covers, the road trips with the windows down and the music too loud, the way she used to say his name like it was a prayer. And now, all of it was gone, replaced by a deafening silence he couldn't outrun. He tried to bury himself in work, in distractions, in the meaningless conversations that filled his days. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Emma, standing alone at that altar, waiting for a future he had promised but never delivered. And it wrecked him, slowly, silently, like water wearing down stone. Meanwhile, Emma's art began to speak for her in ways words never could. Her paintings raw and aching, full of soft blues and furious reds, each stroke a release, a reckoning. And as people gathered in front of her work during her first gallery show, they saw not just color, but heartbreak personified. And though she smiled politely through the evening, her soul still trembled from time to time when someone mentioned weddings or used the word forever too easily. She had learned the hard way that love could be cruel, That sometimes the people who swore they'd protect your heart were the ones who shattered it the most. And yet, despite it all, she held no hatred for Jack, only a deep, unrelenting sadness for what could have been. And Jack, lost in the wreckage of his choices, finally broke down one night, unable to breathe beneath the weight of his regret, collapsing on the kitchen floor of the apartment he no longer wanted to be in, whispering her name like a confession, like a plea. Emma, 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 over and over, until the sound was nothing but a croak in his throat. And he knew then that he had to see her, if only to say what should have been said long ago. He stood on the sidewalk outside her apartment the next morning, the cold wind biting at his skin, a bouquet of daisies in his hand because they were her favorite. And when she opened the door, wearing an oversized sweater and tired eyes, there was a long silence between them, thick with everything they hadn't said. And she simply stared at him, waiting. "I was afraid," he began, voice cracking. "Afraid of how much I loved you, of how real it was, of losing myself. So when Sophia showed up, I ran. Not because I loved her more, but because she was familiar, and you were everything, and that terrified me." And though her heart clenched at his words, and a tear slipped down her cheek uninvited, Emma stepped back and shook her head gently. "I waited for you, Jack. I waited and believed and trusted you. And you left me on our wedding day." Her voice didn't rise, it didn't tremble, but it carried a weight that hit him harder than any scream could. And when he said, "I'm sorry," she replied, "So am I," before gently closing the door, not out of anger, but out of a love that had finally learned to protect itself. Jack stood there for a long time, the daisies wilting in his hand. And in that moment, he realized that some mistakes don't get happy endings, that sometimes you lose the one person who truly saw you, and the cost of that is a lifetime of what-ifs. And in the days that followed, Jack drifted through his life like a ghost, haunted by everything he'd broken, and the version of himself he no longer recognized, each morning beginning with a pause. A moment of stillness where he hoped waking up might reset everything. But of course, it never did. And while he tried to convince himself to move on, to find solace in distractions or in casual smiles from strangers, nothing filled the Emma-shaped hole in his world. Because the truth was, you don't just walk away from a soul that felt like home and find peace in borrowed affection. And no matter how many times he replayed their last conversation, he knew that her quiet strength, her ability to walk away when all she ever wanted was to stay, was what made her unforgettable. Meanwhile, Emma threw herself into the life she was rebuilding, surrounding herself with soft things. Tea that warmed her palms, books that held her long into the night, friends who never pushed but always listened, and the small routines that made her feel steady again. But the cracks were still there, sometimes showing up in the middle of laughter, in the middle of joy, like faded scars on her skin, reminders of a love that almost was. She told herself she was healing, and she was, but healing isn't linear. And there were nights when her chest ached with missing him, not the Jack who left her, but the Jack who kissed her fingertips after long days and whispered dreams into her hair. And she hated how even now, her love for him hadn't completely died, only shifted into a different shape, something quieter, sadder, more resigned. Jack wrote letters he never sent, pages filled with confessions, memories, apologies, and tucked them into a box beneath his bed, as though writing them down could somehow absolve him, could somehow allow him to hold the weight of his regret without drowning in it. But no matter how many words he poured out, none of them could rewrite the moment he walked away. And Sophia, having watched him spiral deeper into silence, finally left too, not with a grand scene, but a simple note that read, "You're still chasing something you destroyed." And Jack didn't chase her, didn't try to fix it, because deep down he knew the damage had already been done. And the only person he truly wanted, truly loved, was the one he had already lost. Emma, now months into her new life, began traveling, filling her soul with unfamiliar skies and new beginnings, sketching strangers on train rides and writing thoughts in the margins of hotel notepads. And for the first time in a long time, she felt more whole than broken, more her than she'd ever been before. Because in losing Jack, she had found parts of herself she never knew she'd buried. And yet, on quiet nights, beneath foreign stars, his memory would still knock gently at the door of her heart, not as a plea to return, but as a soft echo of something that once mattered deeply. Jack, back in the city they once called theirs, visited the places they loved, each one a shrine to what used to be. And when he saw one of her paintings featured in a gallery downtown, titled The Altar, he stood in front of it for what felt like hours, tears silently sliding down his cheeks as he realized it wasn't anger or hatred she had left on that canvas. It was grief, yes, and heartbreak, but also love. And the ache of knowing he had once been worthy of it made his knees buckle slightly beneath him. Because some stories don't end with a kiss or a reunion, but with two people walking away stronger, softer, wiser, knowing that some loves aren't meant to last. They're meant to teach.